All right. Now, I want to talk to y'all for a minute about a game idea that I have. Now, I've been playing video games for years, all right, since I was a kid. So it's something where, with my gaming experience and talking to other gamers, friends of mine that enjoy playing video games, I had an idea for a game. Now, the problem that I've noticed with some of the different games is every once in a while they have games where they're like, it was kind of a hodgepodge of stuff, didn't really have direction, looked like it was trying to be this kind of game and that kind of game, didn't really know where it was going with it. That's because they didn't have someone who actually knew what they were doing. Because of the fact that, they couldn't figure out how gamers actually play games, I guess. Which is odd because some of those game companies, I mean, isn't it a bunch of gamers that are creating the games somewhat? Or is it just some corporation just trying to make some money? Now, that's why I actually have an idea for a game, and it sounds complex, but those that are programmers and those that have created games might realize it isn't as complex of an idea as you might think, especially when you realize how games actually work and programming works. Because it's like, when you make certain choices in games, the audio track changes at different times, doesn't it? And when you realize that in certain games, when you, have certain items and put them together for certain looks, right? All sorts of different stuff that they have for graphics and pieces of armor and all that kind of stuff, right? That as you customize some of your characters, it isn't as complex of an idea as some would have you believe. The idea that there could actually be a game, right? That the game itself is tailored to the player, to whoever it is that actually wants to play the game, right? Now, the reason for that is because then different, you know, players, non players, those that, are thinking about playing, have an opportunity to have various ways of expressing themselves somewhat through their gameplay. For those that just want to play the game, where they're like, I just want to play, I don't want to have to deal with role playing type of stuff and making a ton of decisions. I just want an action game. Well, at the beginning of the game, there would actually be something where it's like, do you want to play? How do you want to play your game? It's like, I just want to play. Then it's like an action game. All right, there isn't really any customization. It's just you have your character, there's the storyline and all that kind of stuff, and you just play the game. All right. So you can actually play the game like that if you want to. It also has a choice, RPG style, right? So if you play RPG style, that means you get to make certain choices. Now those choices that you can make, it actually is separated into where it's like what kind of RPG style do you want? Simplistic, moderate, complex. Realizing simplistic means that you can customize somewhat, but you don't have to go into in-depth type of stuff, and all that. It's just very basic. It's like here's your choice of weapons that you want to make, right? Moderate is something where it's like with those different weapons and stuff like that. It has it where you can actually choose what it looks like a little bit more, like switching a hilt and a blade, right? And complex is where it's like you start having stuff as to what kind of material you're using for the specific one and what it looks like, customization, all that kind of stuff, to where even on the hilt you might choose what jewels you want, like if you want a diamond and rubies and stuff, you know what I mean? So that when you realize the different levels of customization, right? And some of it, like I said, to some they might be like, "Wow, that sounds really complicated," but you might be surprised at, in essence, how simplistic it really is. You know what I mean? I mean, it is complicated to a certain extent, but then when you realize how certain stuff works, anyways, and just sometimes the changing of colors, right? Somewhat. You know what I mean? It isn't as difficult to process as you might think. And there's other games that have proven that somewhat. That's why, some of the different games that were created at different points, if you realize how they actually worked, what it is that they do with some of those choices, and how it plays out to now with modern technology, the type of game I'm talking about is possible. Years ago, it wasn't. They didn't have computers that were fast enough to, keep up with what it is that needs to be done for that type of game, right? Now, when you realize if it's an online game, almost like an MMORPG, except you can choose if you want to play MMORPG or if you just want to play single player. So imagine, if it was somewhere like, they have like Elder Scrolls Online and Skyrim, just using a couple Elder Scrolls games, right? So imagine if you were playing Skyrim and then you could just go, well, I feel like playing online, MMORPG. So then you go to MMORPG and suddenly your character is now in Elder Scrolls Online. You know what I mean? So if you want to play single player, you can play single player. If you want to play MMORPG, you can play MMORPG. But it's basically an online game that allows you to make that choice as to whether you want to play single player with a bunch of NPCs or if you want to play MMORPG with a bunch of other players. Alright? You kind of figuring some of it out a little bit? Now, what's interesting is the game that I want to create actually takes place in the past, present, and future. Alright? So in the past, realize it's kind of like Skyrim. Alright? One of those types of games. Where there's dragons and there's goblins and ogres and all that kind of stuff, right? Like that kind of stuff. And then there's the present. Now, what's funny is there's certain stuff that's accepted more in the past than in the present. And why is that? Because at certain points, when it gets to when you go to the Old West, for example, if you were using laser guns and if you had future tech and stuff, guess what they'd think? In the past, though, is when it's Skyrim, if you use that stuff, they're just like, oh, it's magic. They don't care. There's dragons and goblins and stuff. It's accepted. Oh, he's just wearing armor. Yeah, it's magic armor. But then when you go to the Old West, it's somewhere if you have that kind of stuff, they're trying to figure out what the freaking hell's going on, right? Which also makes you kind of wonder, how did it get to a point where magic and dragons was something everyone accepted, and then suddenly at a certain point, guess what? Everyone thinks the dragons are fairy tales. Everyone, thinks that just a gun is the most high tech kind of weaponry, and it's but years ago they had what they considered magic. That is basically almost more advanced weaponry. You know what I mean? And then during the present, where it's realizing some of the different stuff that would be acceptable today, that compared to before and other stuff, you know what I mean? When you start realizing how that plays into what you can and can't do, within the game without having certain types of consequences, right? And then having it where it's at the beginning of the game, you can also choose your sexuality. Now, if you choose, straight, then it's dependent on whether you choose male or female, right? As to what gets said and done in certain aspects of the game. Realizing that, it's just audio that's recorded for whoever it is that's playing, right? So that so that romance storylines and all that stuff play to your sexuality. And you don't have to worry about any other stuff if you don't want to. If you choose gay, then once again it would choose those types of audio, vocals for what you chose. If you choose bisexual, well then guess what it does? It's just kind of something where each person can choose how they want to play the game, but it still follows a certain kind of deal with how they make games. Now, if you realize how they make games, so that players make choices, and a lot of times those choices are still somewhat linear, right? because whatever choices you make, you're still basically going on a linear path. At the same time, some games have it where there's certain choices that matter, and that is where it deviates from those linear games, right? So while some storylines have a linear path somewhat, you also have to realize that certain choices that are made as to what you're wearing, what you use for weaponry, and all that stuff can have certain consequences. It can change stuff for the future from the past, depending on what you do, what you leave behind when you go somewhere else, who it is that watches as certain stuff happens, all that kind of stuff, right? And like I said, it sounds like it could be complex, but it isn't as complex as you might think. And if you have good story writers, and if you realize, some of the games that are actually really good games, the different ones enjoy playing and have played over and over and over again, what is it that made those such fun games to play? Now, thinking about, some of the different dynamics of the game itself, if you look at games like Star Wars Battlefront, right? For like space battle, space combat, different stuff. Some of the Battlefront games for, warfare and stuff, right? I'm realizing what can actually be done in certain games. Having a game that's similar to, like Skyrim, similar to Mass Effect, similar to some of those different types of role playing games, right? And then when you realize how it all works together, right? Like when you go to the past, you aren't really thinking about, going to other planets. It's like going to Skyrim, and then you aren't necessarily going to alien worlds. However, when you go to the past, you also realize that the dragons, the ogres, that they're actually alien species because you recognize them from the future. How did they ever get to Earth and why did they leave? Why is it that certain ones, in the past looked at it magic, you know what I mean? When you start realizing what was magic actually. And then, how does it play out to like now? Because when you realize today, what is there that's happening now, right? What do we have for modern technology now? When you look at a TV, if you go to the past, if you had a TV with video cameras, oh, there's a scrying eye. What sorcery is this? You know, and then in the present, it's like, oh, wow, that's a nice security system you have. You know what I mean? When you start realizing some of the different aspects of gameplay and what could actually make it a fun game to play, and that different ones can choose if they want to just stay in a certain timeline and just keep playing. Like in the Old West, if you think about something where it's like Red Dead Redemption, right? The original game had certain points where you actually were driving cattle. But it didn't have something where you could actually go to a ranch and say, I feel like driving cattle, right? In the game that I'm thinking of, you could actually go to various ranches and they'd have stuff where you could actually look for certain types of work. So you could actually look for, a cattle drive. And then you go to that ranch and then you help them drive the cattle wherever they need to go. And you can make money helping drive the cattle, right? And then it's stuff where it's like, maybe you like trains. So if there's an old train that's going, maybe you could get work as a conductor. Maybe you want to rob the train. Maybe you want to join with a group of bandits or something like that. Maybe you want to start your own bandit group. Maybe it's something where it's like, when you realize that, like in the present, maybe you want to race cars. Maybe you go to some, place and you get yourself a car and you start playing games. It's almost like a Need for Speed or a Forza Motorsport type of game and stuff, and then realizing that you can do that kind of stuff in the game too. That there's certain places you can go and race cars. In the past, you can race horses. In the future, you can race like speeder bike type of stuff. When you realize all the different types of stuff different ones can do, that they don't have to necessarily play the entire game if they don't want to. And part of the interesting dynamic of it is when you realize because it involves time travel, the amount of time you're in one particular area doesn't necessarily affect the game itself, because when you realize time travel allows you to go where you need to, when you need to still play the storyline, even if you're in one area for, what would be considered years and years, right? And so it's just kind of interesting if you start really thinking about the type of game that I'm talking about and how it would actually conform to the player so that the player would actually feel like it was a game for them personally. Even though it's a game that's for just about anyone. But because of the way that the game is actually styled and the way that it is that you can make certain choices and what you can actually do, it's a game for actual players and gamers. It's a game that they can enjoy because it's the type of game made for each of them personally. That if they want to play with a bunch of other players, they can, and if they want to play single player, they can. If they want to, play a racing game, they can play a racing game. If they want to play a war game, they can play a war game. It's all in one game. And it isn't a game that they'd be going, well, what is it? It seems like it's trying to be one type of game, but it isn't. It isn't trying to be several different types of games. It is one type of game. A type of game that really hasn't been done yet. And if you realize how it would actually work, and what it could do for those who maybe are questioning playing certain types of games. Maybe they're action game oriented. Well, guess what? They can enjoy playing an action game. Maybe they enjoy race car games, and they can enjoy that. Maybe they enjoy sports games. Guess what? They can play sports. Maybe they enjoy first-person shooters. Well, guess what? You can play a first-person shooter. Maybe they like role-playing games and MMORPGs. Well, guess what? It's all part of the same game. A game made for you, the player. And yet it allows you the opportunity to try different styles, play, different styles of gaming. So it isn't trying to be all those different types of games. It is all of those games in one game. But it doesn't feel like it's separated into different games. It doesn't feel like those different games don't belong together. Instead, it feels natural. It feels like one very together game. A game that can bring all of those different types of games together for a game that anyone can enjoy. That's the basic idea of my game that I want to create. And I've been trying to create. And I have been trying to talk to different ones about, because I have the entire storyline already thought out. And I just need some good writers, some good graphic designers, a good video game company that might actually want to create a game like no other game before. I mean, sure, you might say, well, there's all those other, yeah, but none of them have done what it is that I want to do. And when you realize the possibilities, when you realize how many different ones it would actually, where they're like, well, I want to play that because I don't have to worry about that part of the game. I can play what I want to play, how I want to play. And then how many more gamers do you think it could create? How many of those from that maybe never wanted to play a first-person shooter might go, well, I just want to play it for that part of the game and because it's a really good part of the game, and then they're like, you know what? While I was, playing, I found out I actually enjoy first-person shooters. I actually found out I enjoy role-playing games. I actually found out that I enjoy sports games. I actually found out I enjoy driving games. And why is it that they branched out into some of that kind of stuff? Because of a game that allowed players to enjoy playing. A game that doesn't force the player to customize themselves to a game, but basically customizes the game to the player. And then when you realize how that works and what it does and how enjoyable and fun it is, it just opens a whole new world of gaming, doesn't it? I just wanted to make a video to explain some of that. Just in case anyone is, of a mind where they're like, you know what, I think it's a good idea. Should probably hire that guy. So that we can actually have a game done right. Because I don't know if you realize it, but there are different ones who have actually, used my ideas before and they didn't have any idea what they were doing, but they refused to hire me. They've stolen ideas in the past. They refused to hire me. They refused to pay me. And then they never actually did make the product the way I would have. And that's why, I've tried to explain some of the different, concepts as to what it is I was actually talking about versus what other ones apparently thought I was talking about with their own ideas of my idea. And a lot of times didn't even work. So hopefully, if someone really likes my idea, wants to hire me, wants to work with me, wants to, help create the game that I've envisioned, it'd be really cool. I'd love to work with them. I realize I'm telling you the idea for the game because if such a game is created and they start calling it a hodgepodge and I ain't a part of the team that created it, they're like, it doesn't really know where it's going. So remember, it's because they refused to hire me while they tried to steal my idea. Just thought I'd mention that. Anyways, hopefully you like the idea, and love to hear from some different ones, especially some of the real gamers.